Connolly.
Chair, thank you. I'm going to give Mr. O'Brien a rest for a moment and just ask the Department of Health. Mr. O'Brien signed a statement on the 16th of May 2017. Statement on internal financial control. There are 17 pages and there are serious issues that they're pointing out to the Department. He's pointing out quite openly to the Department of Health the problems. What has the Department of Health's response to that statement?
I think our main concern was, having had the issues brought to our attention, to understand the actions the HSE were taking to remedy the underlying issues. And so we've continued to engage and continue to receive reports on progress being made.
So just try and spell that out for me now since May, because have you read these 17 pages? Mm-hmm. You have? Okay. And you see the serious issues that are being highlighted throughout, well, certainly in the last 5 pages. Serious concerns in relation to governance issues, so on. I won't read them out because I have 5 minutes. So you've seen this, you've read it. What have you done about it, the department?
Well, to say again, I mean...
How many times have you met in relation to this? How many times have you met management of the Health Executive in relation to this very significant statement?
I think there's a process of engagement ongoing with the HSE and the department, which considers performance and governance, which is ongoing. So I wouldn't be able to give a number of meetings specifically on this.
Do you accept there's a serious problem here, notwithstanding the effort? And I appreciate that progress has been made since last year. I have last year's here, okay, and I understand that Mr. O'Brien and the Health Executive have made some progress. But it's been read out to you, the summary of the internal audit findings. There are serious issues. Serious issues raised by the Controller and Auditor General in relation to financial controls, the absence of internal financial controls in relation to governance, over 50% of the sample. So rather than reading them all, does the Department of Health accept that there's a serious problem here in relation to governance with these different organisations?
I think our view would be that there's an issue, but it has been identified, and action is being taken to remedy that, and we welcome that action. And you can see in some of the reports the improvements that have been made and the progress that's been made and the increase in compliance levels.
Just Mr. Flynn, in relation to the internal audit, I would also like to say well done to the internal audit in relation to Console. At the time I read it in detail, it was very detailed. I'm a little bit concerned that you're talking about potentially systemic. I actually came down without it, but I read it last night. Systemic was the word used. Wasn't potential. Just let me finish, because my question. It was systemic. They were all read. Every single recommendation was read, and nearly every recommendation was also directed to the Health Executive. What has been done in relation? Are you satisfied that those recommendations in relation to the Health Executive have been acted on?
There has been a lot of implementation of those recommendations of all of these reports. I think at this stage we're running at about 80% of the findings from all of those reports have been implemented. 80%. So there has been good progress in implementing them.
Have you had extra staff since that internal audit?
No, we've had the same level of staff.
Same level of staff? Yeah. Okay. Have you asked for extra staff?
There is a request in the estimates process for additional staff for internal audit. Yes.
And in relation to, my colleague asked you how many audits. There were 19. There were targeted audits.
Most of those were targeted.
No, sorry, which now?
Most
of the results here.
Most of those are targeted, I think I said, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in 2016-17 you started to look at random.
Yes, that's correct.
Why aren't you doing more random?
Well, we are doing more random now.
Okay, how many have you done?
This year we expect to do 40 audits of funded organisations in total.
How many have you done?
We would have done about 27, 28 already, I think.
27?
Yeah.
Of random?
No, of total audits, sorry.
No, how many random audits have you done?
Of that, at least over half would be random audits.
Okay. And why didn't you do random ones before 16-17?
Well, I think we were focusing initially on where people in the HSE identified there'd be particular problems. So obviously that's the first place to go to. If people identify to us, I mean, that's the way we operate. If a national director says to us, I think we've got a problem here, could you carry out an audit, then we will do that. The idea of doing the random ones then is to just go out and see what the generality of situations are like to see if you can compare those against the target.
You're saying it's coming from the director to tell you which ones to audit?
Well, on the targeted ones, it would be from my colleagues in the HSE who would come to us and say, I would write to them before the audit plan, the annual audit plan, and say, are there particular areas you would like us to include in the audit plan?
Yeah, just, Mr. Flynn, I'm no accountant, and my knowledge in relation to, I put up my hands, my ignorance in relation to it. But when I read and reread, there seems to be not just from Console, and the effect of Console is still there on the ground, with organisations on the ground suffering as a result of what happened in relation to Console, and also employees, let me say, which has been raised repeatedly at this level. But systemic was the word used. And when we look at the sample from the Controller and Auditor General, and when we look at your sample, they're not just one-off. They're not just one-off Consoles. There are serious problems coming back. Simple things, like I know we're talking about Section 38s and 39s, and just the vast amount of money goes to the Section 38s, and there are different governance arrangements for the two. I understand all of that. So simple things like under the Section 39s, the chairperson of the organisation or the board not coming back with a statement at the end of the year. Okay, all of these high number of bank accounts and so on, that's more than just once off, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so what, see, I'm looking and I see the compliance statement or the briefing document from Mr. O'Brien and all the things. So we have internal audit reporting to an audit committee. Then we have the Controller and Auditor General doing his statutory duty. Then we have all the external reviews by the various that I'm going to come to now in a minute. We have a compliance unit that's costing. We have a control, another one that's to be set up, a contract support unit. So I looked and I asked last year, or somebody did, for the cost of all of that. It's in millions. I have it there, the cost, and we haven't even put in the new ones. I'm wondering what resources would be needed at your level rather than reactively at all of these other levels. What do you need to do a proper job and give us confidence?
I think, Deputy, the first thing that needs to be done, and I accept that we can only do a small proportion of those things, but all of those organisations have provided audited accounts signed by external
not
firms.
All of them.
Well, virtually every one.
Section 38.
No, the 39s as well.
No, it's here somewhere that they didn't. I'll come back to it.
No, but they do have them. Whether they've issued them to the HSE or not is another thing, Deputy, but they would have a firm of auditors signing their set of accounts for them.
Not all of the organisations have given the required audited accounts.
No, but they would probably have them. They may not have given them to the HSE, I think, Deputy.
You're utterly reliant on audited accounts, and even when you get them, as in the case of Console, we know now, and Mr. O'Brien has admitted, you couldn't rely on those, although you did.
Yeah, well, I think a funder has to be able to place some reliance on the work of external firms of accountants who are signing audited reports for funded agencies.
One would assume that,
yes,
and one would like to believe that. But that actually wasn't the case.
Not the case in this.
Okay, and separate from that, on occasions, the required audit accounts don't come back either. Okay, so just let me go back to my question. So we're looking at an internal audit, an audit committee, and then all of these other extra layers that we're now learning about that are costing millions. We know they're costing millions because I have it here and I haven't even the up-to-date figures. Would it not be better to resource internal audit?
Well, I think that the more important thing to an extent is to have a very strong line management involvement with the funded agencies, and then to have a good internal audit unit coming in on top of that. But I don't see the solution being in to have 500 in internal audit going out and auditing every single organisation.
Okay.
But I think there is a need for a strong internal audit.
What's happening now is we have external reviews. Because of the problems that have emerged with external reviews.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien, can you answer about the external reviews, or is it Mr. Mulvaney?
First of all, can I say that in relation to the AFS's received for 2015, we have 100% receipt of annual financial statements in relation to funded agencies. That's one of the improvements that has occurred. As to the distinction of where one would put resources between internal audit or management, internal audit is kind of a post-event. You're finding out what hasn't happened or what has happened that shouldn't have happened. So there has to be a balance between the resources we put in there, and if I had them, I'd put more resources in there, and the resources at the front end of the relationship, which are designed to manage not just financial compliance, but also the quality of services, the interests of the clients, and all of that. And that's part of the area we're focusing on both by resourcing the community health organisations to develop that relationship and deepen it on the one hand, and through the compliance unit, helping, I know you're shaking your head, but I will finish, to help a whole lot of voluntary people involved in voluntary governance to do their thing better.
I'm not into this voluntary people. I'm asking, holding the health executive to account. We're not looking down on...
You asked a specific question about where we should put the resources.
You've used your opening statement and you're using it again to talk about what the good work they're doing.
No,
Certainly.
I'm not. I'm talking about the future in response to your question. Where should we put the resources?
Okay, I'm asking specifically in relation to the external reviews that were carried out. How many were carried out, please?
Yeah, 3 reports definitely have been finalised, and 25 draft reports have been provided to the individual Section 39 agencies. So we're doing external reviews on all 39,
all
of
39
of the 38 of the Section 38 organisations.
Yeah, and where? Sorry, no, just tell me again.
We've 3 finished.
3 finished. Yeah.
Another 25 with draft reports complete and gone to the agencies themselves.
Yeah.
So that's effectively 28 nearing finished. And the expectation is that we should get most of them finished in exam by the end of the year. And for next year, I think the intent is to add the largest of the Section 39s and effectively create a 5-year rolling process of external review.
Who is carrying out those reviews?
External consultancy firm.
One firm, is it?
The vast bulk, I think, are a single firm, Deloitte.
Deloitte?
Yeah.
Okay. Was that put out to public procurement, or what was the process in relation to getting them?
It was, definitely.
Okay. And so they're carrying out. What cost is that?
My colleague might.
We can share the costs with you, but they're commercially sensitive at the moment because, excuse me, there is going to be a rolling programme of reviews, and we will be going to the market for that as well. But I can make the costs available to you. The
I'd appreciate that, because I'm allergic to the word commercially sensitive, because every aspect of public bodies are open for scrutiny, and then when we go to look at private companies, it's certainly commercially. So what, let me just be clear, the cost of these reviews. Don't answer that.
Yes, it's commercially sensitive because we're going to be in a procurement process, and we would compromise our secondary or primary obligation to secure value for money if we disclose that figure here in open session. Mr. Cregan has indicated that we will seek to find a way to share it with the committee that doesn't compromise that process, and I think that's reasonable.
What issues are showing up as a result of the reviews to date?
John.
The indications to us are that the issues that are coming up are very similar to what the CNAG has already alerted you to, which are issues around procurement, compliance with public sector pay norms, and the absence of internal audit.
Serious issues?
Well, I've already draft reports. I've only got 3 reports.
The 3 you've mentioned are serious issues.
Well, there's a range of categories. Some of them are deemed to be significant issues that we have to address.
Okay. How many are not complying with public pay policy?
Yeah.
How many are not complying?
I don't have the details of the reports at the moment, but it is an issue for some of them. Now, it may not relate specifically to the chief executive of the organisation, but they're identifying more allowances, if you like, that have to be addressed. Can I just say, in relation to the discussion so far in terms of identification of problems, one of the issues we're testing is that people are sending in, and particularly large organisations, they're sending in their assurance statements to us. And for the large organisations, what we're doing now is testing what they have actually said to us, is it right or not? And we will be doing that on an ongoing basis. So that's the purpose of the reviews, if you like.
Many organisations are not complying with public pay policy. Public pay? 15?
Yes.
Okay. 15 organisations. How far out are they in relation to their... They're not complying. Give me the nature of the non-compliance.
I have the entire breakdown here and happy to share it with the committee afterwards as that's deemed appropriate. They range from a multitask attendant being paid as a grade 4, an additional clinic allowance that's not approved or whatever else. So the scale is from, very minor to very serious.
What's the very serious one?
But I suppose they're all very serious if they're not compliant. But you can pour
I'm just
over.
taking the range. I just want the range. You were about to give me the range and you've stopped. So.
Yeah, well, I suppose I don't want to identify people because I am happy to share the template, but I suppose just looking here at them, and they're all itemised with a specific detail, okay. I see one there really that's, and I deem anything over €5,000 to be fairly serious because it is public money, and we have communicated extensively with these agencies around their requirement to ensure compliance. So if anything is over €5,000, I deem that fairly serious.
Okay, and I see that you've written out on a number of occasions to a number of bodies. So the 15 bodies you've written out to, or is it more?
Oh, I've written out to them all extensively. Yes,
and
at this point in time, there are 15 agencies that are not compliant with pay policy.
At this point?
At this point in time.
And were there more and changed after you wrote out to them?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. At one point in time, we would have had 555 business cases that would have indicated non-compliance. We have dealt with 235 of those. Okay, as I said, some of those are quite minor issues that relate to people not being paid on the appropriate scale. Maybe a play therapist been paid as an attendant, etc., and you just need to get those correct because to the strict letter of the law, they do not comply with public pay policy. There are 320 that we're working on at the moment. That's a work in progress, and that 320 business cases from 15 agencies. Okay. I have the breakdown of the agency and the number, the relevant business case. Now, they would have been come to our awareness through responses to the communications that I issued, notification from internal audit, notification from the compliance unit. So it is a matter that's very much under control. It's getting a lot of focus. We are working, I'd have to say we're working very constructively with these agencies, and it's not punitive. We can't deem them compliant, so there's a process of engagement and dialogue around that, looking at the business case, discussing it with our funders in the department, and then deeming it compliant or not. Okay. Some of it relates to ER and IR issues as well, so somebody may already have an entitlement to retain an allowance. So therefore,
my difficulty is I've asked a question and you're not. I'm going to get it afterwards. So I thank you. Thank you very much. You've been very helpful. Okay. My last question, or am I finished?
No,
the last question was just in relation to your. If I'm finished, I'm finished. I don't know. Am I finished?
You're gone.
It was in relation to non-compliance with the signing of a service arrangement, and you brought in a penalty.
I wouldn't call it a penalty.
No, okay.
It's a consequence.
Well, the consequence was that there was a certain percentage of the funding held back. Is that right?
Yes, but that was retained for them as opposed to.
No, that's okay. I'm not into punishment myself, Mr. O'Brien, believe it or not. But I just wanted to know the implications of what you've learned from that. That was just in relation to one aspect. It was the timeliness of signing the arrangement. Isn't that right?
I learned that the best way to herd cats is to move the food. And the consequence of having a holdback produced a very dramatic change in the compliance. Are there
implications for that for other? That's only one aspect, the timeliness. Have you looked at that and evaluated to see how it could be applied in that positive manner in relation to other faults?
Yeah, I have been having discussions actually very recently about what we would do in relation to some of the audit recommendations that are growing too old and whether a similar process might be applied. By and large, we're seeing that there is, and Michael has referred to it, about 80% compliance with the recommendations here. And we have some tolerance because some of them just take longer to fix. But if we get to the point, particularly if we get assurance that an audit recommendation has been complied with and subsequently find that it has not been complied with, that will have a financial consequence. But we haven't moved to that stage yet.
Okay.